Boker Tov.
Boker or.
Boker Ra. No.
I didn't say that.
You said Boker what?
Boker or. Light.
Light.
Yeah, that's the response. When somebody says Boker Tov, you say Boker or.
Morning light.
Yes. The other possibility is Boker mediocre.
Meh.
Meh.
Now, where are you this? Oh, you're on the beamer. Yeah.
I'm on the beamer. Yeah, I'm a little disheveled. We just had a fire. The alarm went off. Everything is fine. The heat went on, so the fire alarm went off.
Oh, no.
I just spent the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes with the police department, the fire department, and the alarm company.
Well, at least, you made it back to the class.
Yep.
I thought you weren't going to be doing the in-person anymore.
I think it's January 1st.
Oh, January 1st. Okay.
Yeah.
January 1st.
No, we have one more class, then we're off. When we come back, I'll switch.
Yeah, I think that's January 2nd, I believe. Yeah, the day after, New Year, Christmas and New Year's is on Sabbat.
Yeah, I'm probably not doing the 2nd. I'm probably doing the 9th.
Yeah. I can't, we're going to have services on the 1st.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe that a lot of people are going to come.
Sponsoring the Kiddush that weekend because it's the 10th anniversary of my mom's passing.
Oh, wow. Well, then some people will be nursing a hangover.
That's right. Good morning. Welcome.
I'm the only one on here.
Yeah, you missed the fun. We had the fire alarm went off, and it's just the heat went on is what happened. So we've had the fire department here, the police department, the alarm company. It's been fun.
When was that?
Oh, it finished about 7 or 8 minutes ago.
Oh my gosh, I wish I knew I'd been here sooner.
The party. Oh, happy birthday again.
Oh, thank you. It's a big one. 75. Messed up on the AI. Was it you who put the thing there for me to use to fetch the door?
No, I'm not sure who did, but yeah.
Oh, I just all of a sudden saw it here because I was kind of looking.
Good morning, Jerry. Yes. Believe me, having sat here for the last week, right? It's been cool.
So
There's Joyce. No, I was in Phoenix.
you were in Phoenix.
Yeah, and there when it's 75 or 80, it's actually not warm. It's cool because of the low humidity. And because of low humidity at night, it drops to 45. The days are beautiful. The evenings are cool. Crisp.
Morning.
Good morning. Yep. Yeah. We never get down to 10%. It's a different feel, and you're walking around with chapstick all the time.
That's what I don't like about dry climates. It's very uncomfortable.
Well, I've learned that when I go out there, this is Ron Moses, that I need to use the saline sprays.
Really?
Within 2 to 3 days out there, I can't sing a note because I just get so dried out, and that helps a lot.
Yeah, your nose, your hands, everything, lips. That's why I love, I hate to say it, but I love a humid climate.
Well, you found the right place. So we're going to be in here one more week, and then we have a couple weeks off. So when we come
Okay.
back, break, that's when we'll go to alarm.
And we're gonna be doing all Zoom starting in January?
That's correct. And this way people can do the readings and participate.
Yeah, it's frustrating not being able to see and hear everybody.
I know, but I can't ask a volunteer to come in and do the whole Zoom setup
no,
every
no.
time we have a class. Yeah,
This is great. This is really a wonderful way of doing it. And as you can see, there are a lot of people that agree with that.
okay. Good. And you can hear can you hear them? At 9:58, people. With cell phones, you can be exact. On timing, you can be exact with the cell phone. Usually you look at watch and I have 9:58, what do you have? Right? But the cell phones tell you the time.
I have to tell you, when I was still working, I had a woman get mad at us once. I think I was still at the Meyer branch. She looks at her cell phone and she said, by my cell phone, by Verizon time, you should still be open. And we said, well,
Mhm. Yep.
our time says it's time to close.
Okay. Dr. Portnoy is here. Okay, let's see. Stanley, no. We have a minion.
Ben, where are you? Are you in California?
No, not yet. That's Wednesday.
Oh, okay. That'll be fun.
Yeah, it should be a good time. My granddaughter's bat mitzvah.
Always nice.
Good morning, Sandy and Leslie. Hi, Joyce.
Hi.
Gail.
Just a minute.
Thanks.
Jerry, how is Aileen doing?
She
You're
is
muted.
doing much better. She's still very tired, but
You're
healing well and improving day by day. Yes.
Good.
We look
good to hear.
forward to seeing her again.
Yeah. Please give her our love.
Yeah.
I will. Thank you.
All right, we're filling in.
Yep.
Cantor, you look very handsome in your sweater.
There you go.
This must be getting close to winter.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was telling people the heat went on in the synagogue this morning for the first time, and as a result, the fire alarm went off, and we just finished visiting with the fire department.
Oy vey.
Is there a Shekianu that you said? Is there a special prayer for that?
Clever, Suzanne.
Thank you. Well, I was freezing. I'm in bed and going, I really don't want to get up.
Okay, and all right, at 10:01, we're gonna get started. You can hear me, I take it, okay?
Yeah.
You can hear me. All
Yeah.
right, I'm gonna go to mute. How do I do this? I wanna mute myself. Okay, why is it not doing what I wanted to do? I hate technology sometimes.
Phyllis is sitting inside.
All right, I'm not figuring out how to mute everybody, so I'm gonna ask everybody to not have side conversations. Okay, here we go. So we're up to talking about the Shmatte business and the period of that time. The German Jews who had come in the middle 1800s and that preceded the Eastern European Jews had established themselves in the garment business. They were already established. Welcome, welcome. And it was natural for those coming to America later, for the newcomers who had the garment experience, to gravitate towards the clothing industry, but in America. But in reality, almost all of them did, even if they had no experience. Quite simply, many of the Eastern European immigrants had no options. The only jobs available to them were in the garment industry, in jobs created by Jews who already had preceded them into the country. Some of the factories, and we use that word loosely, were nothing more than sectioned off rooms in walk-up tenements, buildings that consisted of large rooms packed with employees. Cold in the winter, hot in the summer, these factories were dirty, they were noisy, they were unhealthy. And the closed windows in these places kept out the fresh air. And as a result, many of the employees there developed lifelong illnesses such as tuberculosis. And so what you have is, for many, they came here because they had heard the streets were paved with gold. And in reality, what they found out is that it turned out to be dirty, crowded streets, roads, to the grimy sweatshops where they toiled in miserable conditions to keep their families alive. And yet initially they were afraid to complain because there were no jobs available. And so they kept their mouths shut. However, over time, we're Jews. We don't put up with things for too long. The tradition of social activism that the new workers brought with them to the countries led to them founding the labor unions in their early stages. And in 1888, the United Hebrew Trades joined together a number of small Jewish unions to bolster their position during strikes. In unity, there is strength was the slogan that led to the founding of the International Ladies Garment Worker Union. Now I know you're all old enough to remember the commercials on television. There's something about the union label, and we all hear that in the back of our heads, right? By 1909, the downtrodden workers, mostly young Jewish women, would no longer tolerate these terrible conditions. And so a strike begins with one factory and quickly spreads to include nearly every shirtwaist factory in the city of New York, where the majority of the Jews are. Day after day, strikers picketed their factories and fought to keep the scab workers out. They faced violence, which the police did little to stop, from gangs hired by the factory owners to intimidate the picketers. Many strikers were hurt, but the picketing continued until it was finally settled in February of 1910 with an agreement on, quote, a shorter work week, meaning 40 hours. I'm fascinated by the concept, but we all assume just 40 hours, it's a normal work week. I don't know whose life that is. It's certainly not the Jewish world. All right. If you've ever worked in a federation or a synagogue or anything like that, 40 hours is a nice start to your work week. I'm sure it's true in the law fields and many others as well. But nonetheless, 40 became the theoretical established pattern. Union solidarity held, and the strike, what was known as the uprising of the 20,000, changed the role of Jews and women in American labor politics. And later that same year, 1910, there was a larger strike of 60,000, mainly male cloak makers, known as the Great Revolt, and it nearly shut down the American garment industry as a result. Within the Jewish community, there was also concern because who was owning these factories? Uptown Jews. Who was working and striking? Downtown Jews. Okay, and so there was a real concern that the Jewish community was in danger itself beyond just the larger issue of the strike. Boston lawyer Louis Brandeis, you may have heard of him, he became a Supreme Court justice, worked out a settlement. A year later in 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company had a fire. March 25, 1911, and it puts a human face on what is the human demands for safe working conditions. 146 workers, mostly young Jewish and Italian women, died because of locked doors, lack of fire extinguishing resources, and an indoor fire escape that was essentially useless. The fire department arrives, and they could do very little to stop the flames because their ladders only reached the 7th floor. And where are the factories and the workers? On the 8th to 10th floor. The falling bodies, the falling victims also made it difficult for the fire department to approach the building. People were jumping to their deaths. A large crowd of bystanders gathered on the street, and they witnessed 62 people jumping or falling to their deaths from the burning building. Lewis Waldman, later a New York State Assemblyman, described the scene as follows, reading number 1. One Saturday afternoon in March of that year, March 25 to be precise, I was sitting at one of the reading tables in the old Astor Library. It was a raw, unpleasant day, and the comfortable reading room seemed a delightful place to spend the remaining hours until the library closed. I was deeply engrossed in my book when I became aware of fire engines racing past the building. By this time, I was sufficiently Americanized to be fascinated by the sound of the fire engines. Along with several others in the library, I ran out to see what was happening and followed crowds of people to the scene of the fire. A few blocks away, the Ash building at the corner of Washington Place and Green Street was ablaze. When we arrived at the scene, the police had thrown up a cordon around the area, and the firemen were helplessly fighting the blaze. The 8th, 9th, and 10th stories of the building were now an enormous roaring cornice of flame. Word had spread through the East Side by some magic of terror that the plant of the Triangle Waste Company was on fire and that several hundred workers were trapped. Horrified and helpless, the crowds, I among them, looked up at the burning building, saw girl after girl appear at the reddened windows, pause for a terrible moment, and then leap to the pavement below, to land as a mangled, bloody pulp. This went on for what seemed a ghastly eternity. Occasionally, a girl who had hesitated too long was licked by pursuing flames, and screaming with clothing and hair ablaze, plunged like a living torch to the street. Life nets held by the firemen were torn by the impact of the falling bodies. The emotions of the crowd were indescribable. Women were hysterical, scores fainted. Men wept as in paroxysms of frenzy. They hurled themselves against the police line. Now, unfortunately, we have 9/11 as a reference point, and we can kind of see this in our heads. It's unfortunately too real to us. All right, it's real. The national outrage of the result of this fire energized the unions, and it led to the enactment of state and federal legislation to improve the safety of American workers. So you've got the union strikes followed by this tragedy, and it changes the nature of the way the world works. Let's talk about getting out of the ghetto. Okay, they've moved into the ghettos. For the people of the book, education, education, education. It became the mantra of pulling oneself out of the ghetto. Arriving, as most people did, with no trade or profession, the first step out was vocational training tinged with Americanism. Organizations founded and funded by uptown Jews offered a variety of training programs, but they weren't necessarily embraced by the downtown Jews because in their attempt to Americanize those on the lower side of Manhattan, the classes were taught not in Yiddish, but in English. And so their attempt was to create an Americanization. The outcome was many people rejected it because they didn't feel comfortable. Nonetheless, many immigrant parents quickly realized that while they may have been limited by cultural, linguistic, and educational handicaps in the New World, for their children, nothing would be impossible. The route out of the Lower East Side was education, and for the children, and the immigrants' children enrolling in the New York State public schools was the beginning of that journey. And by 1908, when the Jews were about a whopping 2% of the population, they made up more than 8.5% of college students, including 13% of all law schools and 6% in dental schools. Right? Education became prime. Author Mary Anton neatly summed up education's strong appeal for immigrants, desperate to transcend through their children the crushing of their realities of their lives with reading number 2. She didn't call it reading number 2, I am. If education, culture, and the higher life were shining things to be worshiped from afar, he still had a means left where he could draw one step nearer to them. He could send his children to school to learn all those things that he knew by fame to be desirable. The common school, at least, perhaps high school, for one or two, perhaps even college. His children should be students, should fill his house with books and intellectual company, and thus he would walk by proxy in the fields of liberal learning. As for the children themselves, he knew no surer way to their advancement and happiness. Right? We all have this experience, and each of us with the generations, my parents, they went through high school, they got a little bit of college education, but with my brother and I, the question was just how many degrees are you going to get? It wasn't even an option. That's what the message of Jewish education and Jewish values towards education was about. I can't imagine I was unique. So this first generation of immigrant groups is by nature bipolar. They have one foot still in the old country, in the cultural memories of their old world, and the other trying to gain a foothold in a strange society with unfamiliar customs and an unrecognizable language. And so what I went online and I found, reading number 3, stages of immigration. What psychologically, what is the normal pattern? And that's what I want to read with you with reading number 3. It gives you a sense, and I know when I went through this on Thursday, there were heads shaking and saying, yeah, I recognize that. So let's see what we get. The stages of immigration have been extensively written about, and the usual beginning point is to talk about the culture shock which occurs after immigration. This culture shock follows on directly as a result of changes which occur to one's value systems, to the new ideas in one's new country. The term culture shock was coined by Calvero Oberg in a 1954 report published by Bob Merrill, in which 5 distinct, ironic, he says 5 distinct stages, then only talks about 4. So I'll tell you in advance, it's 4. 4 distinct stages of culture shock were identified. All people experience the same feelings of strangeness when traveling to or living in another country, and this process has a cause, symptoms, and resolution. So let's talk about the 4 stages. Honeymoon phase. La, 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 everything's great. Most people begin with great expectations and a positive mindset. There is excitement, new sights, new smells, new tastes, and the early problems are experienced as quaint. They're part of the newness. Anything new is intriguing and exciting. And anyway, there are more pressing problems to deal with, like opening a bank account, getting a driver's license, finding schools, doctors, dentists, gynecologists. These are usually handled with the accompanying euphoria of having overcome each of these first hurdles successfully. Everything is exciting. You move to a new city. I have the same experience. I moved to Houston. Look at all the new restaurants. This is so exciting. Everything is great. I hadn't encountered the humidity quite yet. 2, rejection phase. The honeymoon phase comes to an end as the newcomer has to deal with transportation problems, shopping problems, or communication problems. Little things come up, but it may start to seem like people somehow no longer care about your problems. They may help, but they don't seem to understand your concern over what they see as small problems. You might even start to think that the people in your new country don't like newcomers. And often you may begin to feel aggressive and start to complain about the new culture or country. This phase is a crisis phase in the disease of culture shock, and is called the rejection phase precisely because it is at this point that the newcomer starts to reject the host country, complaining about and noticing only the bad things that bother them. Step 2. Step 3. Now, if you've already struggled with stage 2, you may find yourself moving into regression, moving backwards. And in this phase of the culture shock, you spend much of your time speaking your own language, watching videos from your home country, eating food from home. You may also notice that you are moving in social circles which are exclusively made up of people from your own background, and you don't want to meet locals. You may spend most of this time complaining about the new country and the culture in its strange and senseless ways. Also, in the regression phase, you may only remember the good things about your home country, which may suddenly seem marvelously wonderful. All the difficulties that you had there are forgotten, and you may find yourself wondering why you ever left. You may now only remember your home country as a wonderful place in which nothing ever went wrong for you. Now, for Jews in leaving Europe, obviously, they still had the pogroms and all the terrible things that went on. But nonetheless, like, even today, we tend to reminisce about the fiddler on the roof culture. And so that they would reminisce back to that and all the problems of poverty and all the problems of the neighborhood tsuris. None of that seems to register anymore. It's time. Everything was great back then. Remember the good old days. I think of the good old days, and we talk about that, and I talk about my great grandmother, and I remember watching her and having to go to the market every day, or doing laundry, or you went to the market every day because there was no such thing as a refrigerator that lasted very long, right? And so it wasn't such a good old time. We live in the good old times. Recovery phase, or at ease at last phase. In this stage, you become more comfortable with the language, and you also feel more comfortable with the customs of your new country. You can now move around without a feeling of anxiety. You still have problems with some of the social cues, and you may not understand everything people say, especially the idioms, or do. However, you are now much better adjusted to the new culture, and you start to realize that no country is that much better than any other. It's just different lifestyles and different ways to deal with the problems of life. With this new adjustment, you accept the food, the drinks, the habits, the customs of the new country. And you may even find yourself preferring some things in the new country to things at home. You have now understood that there are different ways to live your life and that no way is really better than another, just different. Finally, you have become comfortable in the new place. It's not so bad. Most importantly, your sense of humor will have returned and you find you're able to look at yourself and laugh. This is the adaptation. These are basically the stages. Not everybody, just like the stages of mourning, goes through them in the same sequence, goes through them in the same degrees, but they seem to be pretty prevalent in terms of the experience of moving to a new country. Any comments or thoughts? Okay, hearing none, let's go on. The new arrivals what they tried to do is to take the old world, the old European cultures, and basically put it into the American way of life, American soil, with limited success. Yiddish culture flourishes for a time with a large array of Yiddish newspapers, Yiddish theater productions, nurturing the old country's ways of life with an American twist to them. And guiding these immigrants through this process, through the maze of everyday life, were their children, raised in the public school systems as absorbent sponges of the American life and language. By this second generation, the children born or raised in America had thrown Yiddish off and the traditional religious practices of the parents. And I'm one of those. I mean, I remember growing up in the house and hearing the Yiddish and going, I don't want that. That's the old ways. I don't want to be like my parents, and that's normal teenager. Anything mom and dad does is wrong by definition. And so we threw it off. At the same time, I turned around, and then my senior year, I guess I had started to do the change back. I took a year of German so that I could get a better gist of what they were saying. And it turned out to be the easiest course I have ever taken. I knew more Yiddish than I thought I knew. Yeah. This second generation, many of them could still speak Yiddish with their parents, but their native tongue was English, making them linguistically indistinguishable from everybody around them. All right. Comments on the Yiddish world. I know a bunch of you are taking Yiddish classes. Good. I hope it's, I hope it, yes.
Oh, I was in New York one time with my mom. My dad was from the Bronx, and we got in a cab, and the driver was speaking Yiddish to her, which I wish I knew. And he looked at me and said, "Shiksa." He really hurt my feelings, because I would have loved to have been able to converse, but my parents, like a lot, switched to Yiddish when they didn't want us to understand.
Right, absolutely. Yes, Leslie.
I can
Joyce, you're
remember
next.
my grandmother, blessed memory, who lived with us for 20 years or so, would speak Yiddish with my mom, but she purposely spoke English with the grandchildren so she could practice her English. But then as I got older and appreciated the value and the beauty of Yiddish and its connection to my background, I felt very disappointed that we didn't learn it in our home.
We all feel that. Yep.
Just was thinking,
I have to imagine many of us. I'm sorry, Joyce, go ahead.
okay, I was thinking that this was such a boon for the parents, because these children were able to be the translators, and how else would they know what was going on? I mean,
Right. They were, one was translations, but they would not just bring a translation of language, they would bring a translation of culture.
Mhm.
All right. And so that it was their exposure in many ways. You guys were able to hear that? Yes, no? Okay, good. This microphone thing works. Okay, good. All right. Religious life. As previous Jewish arrivals had before them, most of these newcomers learned to adapt their religious lives to fit the demands of America. Survival often depended on work. And with Sunday being a legal day of rest, blue laws, all commerce are prohibited in most places, it unfortunately became necessary for many breadwinners to work on Saturday, particularly true for those who came here individually to bring their families. And I have those same stories in my background of my great-grandfather coming and working on Shabbos until he was able to bring the family here. By the mid-1880s, in New York, Eastern European Orthodox Jews had become the majority within the city. Before it had been the Reformed Germans, now these Eastern European Jews have become the majority, and they seek to recreate a European model of their religious experiences. Among other factors, they were concerned about the various standards for kashrut that resulted from a lack of central authority, that somebody needed to supervise the ritual slaughters, the shochet. Furthermore, and I find this fascinating because to a modern American sensitivities, Jewish sensitivities, this doesn't make sense at all. There is no universally accepted Beit Din, so that as a result of that, every synagogue is free to set its own standards and practices. Now, could you imagine in today's world, someone from the outside, the conservative movement showing up in our synagogue and saying, this is unacceptable? I don't think I'd want to be in the room. All right. In America, in contrast to Europe, the power within the congregation, the lay leaders took the power. That was not the case in Europe. In America, the lay leaders trumped the scholarship, the piety, and the authority of the rabbis. And that is brand new and distinct to America. With the main goal of trying to bring these newcomers solidly into the larger society of America, the established Jewish community could not ignore the importance of religion. Children of immigrants, these are the children of the immigrants, don't feel at home in the Yiddish-speaking world. They've gone to school. They've been enculturated, all right? With the old world orthodoxy of Europe, they're uncomfortable. But neither are many of them comfortable with what the alternative is in America for Jews, and that's the reform movement. Okay, that's really all there are as options. There's a fear that these two extremes would end up driving Jews, the young Jews and the children, from Judaism entirely. And indeed, this is a time in which what you'll see in the Lower East Side are Christian missionaries. They are aware that this discomfort exists, and they make the fear immediate, although their success was very limited at the time. As if on command, a middle road to Jewish religious observance appeared. Its roots were established in 1883 at a banquet that marked the first graduation of American-trained Reform rabbis from the Hebrew Union College. The menu was varied and, to many, shocking. Shrimp and crab meat appetizers were followed by meat and ice cream. Now I'm going to give you a second. I can't read, my French is horrendous. I'll let you look at the menu, reading number 4. Take a second and look through it. Now, mind you, this is the first graduation of rabbinic students. I think a point is being made. All right, clearly a point is being made. And some bewildered guests left the room in disgust. Others sat stunned, not daring to touch the food before them. The reform movement is at a stage in which it is struggling between its liberal end and its more traditional end. And the liberals of the movement had made their point. There was no place in their vision of Reform Judaism for those who wanted to hold on to tradition. Became known as the Trefa Banquet, and it directly triggered the development of conservative Judaism. The ascendant liberal wing of the Reform movement is further institutionalized in the Pittsburgh Platform 2 years later in 1885. Others within the Reform movement on the more traditional end withdrew, and they formed the Jewish Theological Seminary. And in 1902, a group of wealthy traditionalist Reform Jews invigorated this with sizable contributions towards the training of American rabbis. Their foresight established the seminary as the fountainhead of conservative Judaism. Now, I say that it's very interesting because almost every other movement starts differently. If you realize there really are 3 elements to Judaism and to conservative Judaism. You have United Synagogue, which is the lay component. You have the Rabbinical Assembly, which is the rabbinical component, and you have the schools. And because it is the school that is the first element that develops within conservative Judaism, the titular head of the conservative movement is the chancellor of the seminary. Mm-hmm. It's not the leader of United Synagogue or the Rabbinic Assembly. It's the seminary. They bring along Solomon Schechter from Europe, and it gives credibility to this new movement. All right. And so there's a lot of readings today, and I apologize for that, but there are certain times where the words of the authors are better than anything I can say. And so I want to give you a bit of a sense of this whole experience, starting with Solomon Schechter, and then going into what we would call the American shtetl from there. First, Solomon Schechter, reading number 5. A child prodigy who became a noted rabbinic scholar and historian, Schechter was born in Romania in 1847. During his studies at the University of Vienna, he formed his own vision of what he called a Catholic Israel, which embraced all Jews, and they would all have this consensus religious practice. In 1890, he became a lecturer at Cambridge University, where his responsibilities included maintaining the university library's Hebrew manuscript collection. His reputation as a scholar grew when his discovery of ancient manuscript fragments in a Cairo synagogue Geniza, we know this is the Cairo Geniza, led to new understandings of the development of Jewish tradition. From 1902 until his death in 1915, Schechter held the presidency of the fledgling Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. Under his leadership, the seminary developed into a major institution of scholarship in the conservative movement in America, and it was recognized and rejuvenated. A little bit about Schechter. I don't know if you've ever read any of Schechter's works. If you want to read dense, have a dictionary nearby and plan to spend 2 or 3 hours on the first few pages, and then you can go on. Yeah, I remember those assignments, not so much with warmth and love. Reading number 6. It should be rails of East European Jews were extricated from their impoverishment in the small Jewish shtetls of Eastern Europe that were made universally known and glamorized by Fiddler on the Roof. Many immigrants were taken out by European and American Jewish philanthropists and settled in various areas of the United States, where they were expected to establish farming communities, regardless of whether or not they had been farmers in the old country. Other groups banded together in the small towns and cities of America, where they retained their shtetl mentality. The American shtetl, essentially, was a clone of the East European one, heavily dependent on religion for its character, its social life, and above all, its cohesiveness. While they lasted, they were as vibrant and colorful as Tevye's shtetl. And then we have some individual people giving us some personal experiences, which I do think you'll relate with along the way. Molly, who was born in one of the New Jersey farming communities in 1893, remembered that it was a very, very tight union. Everyone knew everyone else. It was like a big family. When there was trouble, they all tried to console if there was one person troubled. When there was happiness or happy occasions, everyone was happy. The synagogue was the focal point. Each person was free to do what he pleased as long as he didn't hurt anyone else. If there was someone who needed to be reminded that he should do the right thing, they told him. Wait, that sounds like a synagogue. Reading number 8. I used to be a farmer here in this community. I was born in the United States. My parents came from Russia, and they always had a dream of having an independent life on the farm. I always wanted to be my own boss, not responsible to anybody and not have anyone tell me what to do. I went to an agricultural school in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, after I graduated from high school. I couldn't afford to go to college, and there was no chance to get some kind of college education free. It was called the National Farm School at the time. Almost all were Jewish students there. The school was established by Dr. Krauskopf, and he was a rabbi. He felt that if they were part of the landed community, they would be accepted by the rest of the population. But in order to be a farmer, you had to know how to farm. So we established a school. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it work in the farm world. My mother-in-law noted an item in the Jewish press that there was going to be a community built by the government to establish a project for the needle trade workers in New Jersey. The people in this area, the surrounding people, didn't like the idea of a Jewish community here at all. They called us Bolsheviks. They called us Reds and Pinkos and whatnot. Hightstown was noted in the early days for its conservatism and its KKK. Here's a Jewish community being set up under their noses, and they certainly didn't like it. But after a while, when we became a little wealthier, we began to do business in Hightstown. We shopped there and we used the bank there. So they accepted us grudgingly, perhaps, but they accepted us. After a while, we established pretty good relationships. Also, our children went to the high school in Hightstown, and our children were bright children and went to some of the best colleges in the country. It didn't make friends for us, but we survived all this and we finally made a place for ourselves here. Helen Bard, reading 9. 1936, we moved to Roosevelt, then called Jersey Homesteads, obviously Roosevelt, New Jersey. My parents were required to make a $500 cash deposit as a share in the community. In return, they got a share in the cooperative, a share in the factory, a share in the retail store, a share in the grocery store, a share in whatever this community was supposed to have been. The town was basically set up to provide industry. There was to have been a garment factory with a retail outlet. The factory was to make ladies' coats and suits. My father's specialty was pockets. Now that is specialization. Benjamin Brown conceived the idea of the community. He owned property nearby and he was a money man. He was an entrepreneur and he had a vision, and he convinced the government that they should subsidize it. I understand that Eleanor Roosevelt, for whatever reason, was very supportive of the project. I believe Brown was a socialist and wanted something like a moshav in Israel today, not like the kibbutz, but more like a moshav, because you would own your own home or live in your own home and you farm, yet you work in the cooperative factory. Every little house like ours had a half acre. And my father, who lived in the Bronx and in a shtetl as a boy in Poland, had a garden every year until 2 years before he died. He gardened every year. They canned tomatoes in the heat of the summer. They made tomato juice and did these wonderful things that I recollect. I remember the community as family. There were as many meetings and as many organizations as there were people. Now that's Jews, all right? And everyone was involved, and yet everyone was family. Times were hard, but we never felt that we were poor. Our family never had a car. There may have been a half dozen cars in town, and we would hitchhike into Hightstown, where all the services were: the kosher butcher, the food store, the movie theater, close your ears, Saturday afternoons. There was a synagogue. Originally, I'm not sure where the synagogue met, but I know that prior to World War II, there was something like a construction shack. It looked like an army barracks. Ultimately, around 1955 or so, they built another very fancy synagogue on another street. So this community, which is now a mixed community, has a synagogue. We don't have a church, but we do have a synagogue. Most everyone went to shul on the high holidays. My parents didn't impose that on me personally. I have my grandmother's Shabbos candlesticks, but I don't bench lick on Friday night. In this community, Christmas didn't exist. It just didn't exist. And as far as I'm concerned, it still doesn't exist. Well, good luck with that. My brother went to Hebrew school. Although there was an Orthodox synagogue in town, my parents did not conduct themselves in an Orthodox manner and felt that I would benefit more from a Yiddish culture experience than to go to a Hebrew school. The forward was delivered there and the tag, but my father's preference was the forward. Some of us were rather frugal. After one person read the forward, they would trade with someone else who got the tag. A unique feature of our community is that we have free burial. Anyone who is a resident of our community can be buried in the community. If one has lived here for 25 years, they have a right to free burial in the community. Unmarried children of residents can be buried there. It's a municipal cemetery with a large Jewish section. What about the charges of communism? That the surrounding people thought this was a communistic society? It was very strange. Here was this group of people who came and spoke with accents, who voted straight Democrat. As I said, the KKK in Allentown, Hightstown had always been a Republican community. What else could they think? I'm going to skip 10, 11, and 12. You can read these at home as well. I'm going to jump to 13. Abyssal noise in the lobby. All right, this is Jack Press. My mother's father and mother came from an old Vilna area where most of the Jews of Burlington, is Burlington, New Jersey, not Vermont, Burlington came from, because Burlington originally was a hotbed of Litvox. Galicianers weren't too readily accepted in this town. We Jews play well together, but after the war, of course, they filtered in here. Now the derivations are forgotten, but it was a strong Litvak community, very strong. Everyone had the same accent in Yiddish, of course. What made it a shtetl? Well, because we were basically in a little Jewish village. Everybody lived together. Everybody was fairly poor. Basically, there were very few professionals. They were all working people. Some were cattle dealers, a few storekeepers, butchers, and so forth. Living so close together, everybody knew each other. Because the tradition of Orthodoxy came with them from Russia, they more or less extended it here. And God help you if you weren't really Orthodox, because you were a goy. You were no good. If you didn't go to shul, you were a goy. Of course, we all went to the same Hebrew school. We all played together. There were a few little cliques among us, but we weren't divided in the day school by money. We were divided by likes and dislikes. We all did the same thing. Burlington was known by various names. This is cute. Either by trade styles or by the derogatory names. You had Cohn the Butcher, Cohn from Vergennes. You had Kirshner the Short, Kirshner the Tail. You also had derogatory names. You had one who was called the Fartzer. He was known for that. Number 14. We had teachers who could not speak English, and so we were a Yiddish community. Everybody was kosher then. If you were found not to be kosher, you were on the S list. You didn't count. You almost got thrown out of the synagogue. We were limited nonetheless with the amount of kosher food we had. A couple of Jewish butchers, and then we had Kolodny's Market, where we used to get the processed meat and stuff from New York, the Hebrew National. We had a Jewish bakery, so we got our bread there. We didn't buy anything in the so-called Goyish stores, nothing except maybe sugar and coffee and natural stuff like that. We used to have a lot of anti-Semitism. In the wintertime, we had to walk to the high school in groups to protect ourselves, to work together in a snowball fight. I have a friend of mine who once said, if you scratch a goy, you'll find an anti-Semite. Having grown up next to the Catholic school, I learned that the first paragraph in their catechism at that time was that the Jews killed Christ. 15. It was a ghetto without the external forces. Forces to hold the people together were all transmitted from Europe to here with a little influence of America. In such a small community, there was a lot of social pressure not to break through the lines and the rules of the ghetto. So for a boy to date a non-Jewish girl, which would be a little ahead of my time, was, my God, the talk of the community. For someone to move to the WASP area of town, my God, that was forbidden. Or to try and join the country club or swim in a certain area that was restricted, well, that news got around pretty quickly. You didn't do things that you weren't supposed to do on Shabbos. Nonetheless, they stretched a little bit so that when I, as a child, after shul, they would give us a few coins to go to the movies on Saturday afternoon. We're talking about the late 1930s. And I remember my mom actually telling me those kinds of stories. The Seder, the traditional Seder, the traditional foods, going with grandmother to the shochet, the slaughterer, to see a chicken ritually slaughtered, influenced me a great deal as a young boy. And I'm talking about when I was 7 or 8 years old. The warmth around the table and the guests that would come, the university students they would bring down for meals and holidays, the warmth that exuded from the family left a great impression upon me. Right, that's where I'm going to stop with the readings and go to number 16 at another time. What I want to do is take a few minutes and give people a chance to share. But what is important, because there's a number of us here, if you do, try to limit yourself to 1 minute. Get to your point, no tangents. So we give other people an opportunity. All right, Sandy, I see your hand, and then, yes, indeed. Okay, we'll go around. Go ahead.
Okay, 2 comments and a question going back. Number 1, my dad's parents came from Vilna, and my grandmother's greatest insult was, as a Galiciana. Second is, George Gershwin was rejected from the Yiddish Theater in New York because they said he looked too American, he couldn't succeed. My question is, going back to the formation of the Jewish Theological Seminary, I think you said it was a reaction. It was started by more traditional members of the Reform movement rather than people from the Orthodox movement.
Right. So the question is, when he's asking, so the conservative movement is in its formative years is a break off from the Reform movement, not Orthodoxy, because it really was about a scientific understanding of the text and how we would approach the text. Within the Reform conservative world, it's a matter of not taking the text literally and being able to apply archaeological findings, to be able to apply linguistic findings that we find that are discovered over time. That's what separates us from the Orthodox. Right? Within that, there's a wide range, and so you end up with a Reform and a conservative movement. But the real distinction between the two is ultimately, at the end of the day, as I tell the kids, what do you believe happened at Sinai? If you believe God handed us the Torah word for word, you've got an Orthodox Jew.
Mm-hmm.
If you have someone who doesn't, you have somebody who's not an Orthodox Jew. Now that can be a full range. And it really has more to do with your belief about that than your level of practice, because a Reformed Jew can be more observant than an Orthodox Jew if he opts in. It's not about the amount you practice. It's what you believe the source of Torah to be. Okay?
Thanks.
All right. Yes. Go ahead.
I remember growing up in Fort Worth, we were at shul every day, where there was 3 days of Hebrew school. Friday night, we were at services. Saturday, we were at services in junior congregation, and then of course, Sunday school. But I remember on Saturday afternoon, when we got back from shul, walking over to the movie theater and going to watch movies. And this came from a very kosher home.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting combination.
Yeah. All right. Rosalind? Okay, go ahead. You just need to unmute. And then Joyce, you're next.
Okay. The Saturday, what Leslie just said, after my bar mitzvah, we got home and whatever the lunch was and everything, Melvin and I asked our folks if we could go to the movies. And the answer was no.
The movies, right?
Yeah, but I also have a question. In reading 6, where you talk about the settling in various areas of the United States, all the examples were in the upper Northeast, Jersey or Burlington, Vermont, I guess. Was it more dispersing of people?
Yeah, the dispersing happened, first of all, it began with the Galveston plan, and we'll talk.
No.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the shtetl experience. Settling in various areas of the United States in reading 6 under the American shtetl. And I was wondering if there were other shtetls in areas of the US other than.
It's breaking up. I can't hear your question. You froze.
In reading number 6.
I'm going to come back. Yeah.
In reading number 6.
I'm still not. I'm not sure I understand your question. That's my problem.
Can you hear reading number 6?
I get number 6. But I don't know what your question is.
Okay. And it says in reading number 6 that the immigrants were taken out and settled in various areas of the United States, and this is under the American shtetl experience.
Yeah.
And I was wondering.
So they were. Right, there was an attempt to move people to different communities and throughout, and mostly in the north and northeast, you're right, because they wanted to be within somewhat of distance. Traveling was difficult. It's how, it's how my family ended up in Albany and not in New York.
Right.
Yeah.
As a, wait a minute, as a shtetl community or as just a member of the widespread community?
They tended to form their own shtetls, whether or not it was by intention or not. They tended to form shtetls because people like yourself, look, you moved to Houston. Where am I living?
Yeah,
I moved into the shtetl.
yeah, I agree.
We tend to do it ourselves,
Yeah.
The definition of what a shtetl is may be a little different today, but nonetheless, we find our own. And you find the same thing, where, Chinatown, we all know where Chinatown is in use.
Yeah.
Okay, people will find those of similar values and structure.
Right.
Yes, I'll repeat the question. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that it's obvious that these stories, these meetings take place in the northern part
Yeah.
of the country. For some of us who grew up in the South, our families had very different experiences, and some of us, like our family, lived perhaps from an area with not as much Judaica, from small towns in the South to Houston, where there was more of the culture that we wanted for our family.
All right, so the comment was that not everybody was in the Northeast. People settled in other places and oftentimes had very little Judaica in the communities in which they lived. And so for many people here in Houston, what they did is they sought it. And they came here to be a little more cohesive as a community and to find the accommodation. And that's true, you see that here, but you also see it to some extent. You're seeing the Orthodox movement moving into the South as well. We saw it with you see it with Torch in Dallas. They had the same thing. As kosher facilities become available, you see more and more people making the moves. So yes, okay. Suzanne, do you have a question? You need to unmute.
I am.
You're muted.
I lived in New Haven, Connecticut for a long time. And Connecticut, like Texas, had the blue laws. Things could not be open on Sundays.
Right.
So there was a kosher supermarket that was open on Sundays and was incredibly busy on Sunday. Could never find a place to park. And then at one point when the blue laws were ended, the store, while still in business, was not as busy as it used to be because it didn't have that one day that nothing else was open. Right. So that was where it kind of was an advantage for that particular store to be able to be open on Sundays because they weren't open on Saturdays.
Lack of competition is very good for business. Yes, absolutely. Anybody else? Yes, Joyce.
I was very much struck by the discussion of the man from Heightstown, where they were afraid to live, to go to the high school in the wintertime because they get into snowball fights. I grew up in the Bronx, and the Bronx is kind of layered, and my cousin and I made the mistake once of going into a different neighborhood to play in their playground, and we were beaten up by a group and chased out by a group of people from that neighborhood. It was not a Jewish neighborhood, and so we learned our lesson.
Yeah, and again, you're living in it, just to make the point, you're living in a country, even at the time in which laws allowed interaction. It was not legally endorsed, and yet the population wasn't necessarily on the same page. Yeah, you find that throughout. But we'll leave it at that. We have one more week before the break. When we come back from the break in January, we're going to meet only online. And at that point, we'll have everybody do the readings. And so I don't go home hoarse. You get a chance to participate, and it's a win-win. All right, everyone, a good week. Stay warm. Bye-bye.
Thank you.